Sorry. Thank you very much for that fine speech. Closing the debate. Order. Closing the debate is Helen Pike. Helen Pike is the Master of Magdalen College School, Oxford. She's the ISC representative in the UK House of Council, sits on the Southern Trust Advisory Board, and is a member of the Case Global Board. She read modern history at the University of Oxford and was a postgraduate student in the USA. She previously served as headmistress of Southampton High School. She's a writer, academic editor, school governor, and trustee of the school in Uganda, and most importantly, clearly, not only former headmistress to Dexter, but also my former headmaster. So I may be in trouble after this debate, who knows? But Helen, you have the ears of this house.
Thank you, Mr. President, for this invitation, and thank you for your welcome, even though I join you today from the other place. Well, you're very good, aren't you? You are, do you know, I've been learning from you. You are so good that you should write a book. Oh, it's okay, you did. Words That Win by Lewis. It was really helpful in preparing for this debate. I am grateful to you. On page 79, I am warned that you may try to capture the moral high ground by pursuing an angels versus demons strategy. Actually, you had Callum do that. You sent him in with that one. You tried to say that you didn't think we were bad people. Thank you. But it's not looking good for us, is it? Basically, VAT on school fees was the fox hunting ban of this government. So far, our sector has been blamed for misbehaving children in the state sector, negative selection. Is that like natural selection? I'm not quite sure what that was, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Leaky roofs and Donald Trump. We game the system. It was really good, actually, to hear hordes of state school-educated people here in the Union announcing how everybody here went to independent school. Okay. I had my heart broken by Dexter, demonstrating that the sector is indeed a broad church indeed. And I'm also here to reassure you, Lewis, that I'm really happy to talk about class. I'm going to talk about class. We're going to go for it now. So I'm going to make a start by explaining to you how surprised I am that actually I'm sitting on this side. Also, I was really surprised that Brett's on that side, because Brett spoke for us. So it's kind of 4v2, but that's okay. So it's surprising to me because I'm going to quote the Secretary of State for Education here. She said she wants to be the one who makes sure that going to an excellent school and having the best opportunities in life is not a matter of chance. And do you know, the weird thing about this is that's exactly what I say to parents on open days. Like the Secretary of State and many of us here, I was educated in a non-selective comprehensive in the north. And I was one of the few people in my large sixth form college who went to Oxford, mainly because one teacher was keen that I applied. So how can Bridget Phillipson and I agree so profoundly about eliminating chance, but disagree so radically about what this means for independent schools? Well, I want to go back to GCSE Results Day a few years ago, first of all. I've got a tale of 3 pupils for you, 2 of whom were at Magdalen College School. The first is now here in Cambridge. The second, his brother, has complex needs and was in a different specialist school. And the third was leaving us. He'd been signed with a professional football club since he was 14, and he was actually mentioned in Match of the Day a few weeks ago, making his debut for West Brom. Now, what interests me here is that we have a big problem with only one of those 3 forms of schooling that I've meant, that with only one of the forms of schooling that those 3 received. There are few things more selective than professional sport, but it's actually entirely socially acceptable to be paid to be a professional footballer as a sixth former than it is for your parents to pay for you to do your A-levels. And to add to this national doublethink, we have loans and we charge fees for selective universities. We have selective state sixth form colleges like Hills Road, down the road in Cambridge. And you also charge for nurseries. So what is it we're objecting to? Is it the exclusivity, the selectiveness? Is it that people pay? We're in a complete mess about this. I'll take it a bit later on if that's all right. So it's no surprise that our opponents' arguments are a bit all over the shop too. So let's take a closer look. It's also socially acceptable and actually increasingly necessary to pay for your education if your child has special needs. We know this because those children were exempted from VAT on school fees on those grounds. And the reason why those with special needs come to independent schools, they're actually a fifth of all of our pupils, is the same reason that many of the severely abled who are in this chamber do so. Their needs are not being met by the mainstream. Now, we are not saying, thank you, that these schools, that schools in general are failing, and actually, nor are our opponents some of the time. In fact, schooling has improved across the board in Britain during the past 40 years. The key drivers for this have already been discussed. They are investment and autonomy. Investment, as you have recognised, has disproportionately happened in London. Autonomy has happened in some ways across the board. And the key reasons that independent schools flourish is because of these things. And as you've recognised, it's no coincidence that academy trusts have organised themselves along the same lines as our sector. So we recognise some of these principles in some areas when it's academies who are fighting to keep these freedoms. Now, I knew you'd want to make one. Why don't we have a little go towards the end? Now, what I don't understand is how... I'm going to come on to the sharp elbowed middle classes. Let's go for it with this. This is what I don't get. It's really fashionable to be sneery about the middle classes. These people who are privileged enough to pay for education alongside the bulk of the tax burden. So, and you know what? It's actually quite confusing to be one of these parents. Many of them grew up in the 90s when John Major wanted everybody to be middle class. And then Tony Blair came along and wanted 50% of us to go to university. And we all bought into this. Everybody bought into this Fabian idea that growth, improvement, and social advancement were actually fine, even if it meant leaving your class. And now these people are kind of marooned in the middle class and being punished for having choice. And I'm a historian, and it seems that every so often we go through this cycle of national self-harm. I'll give you some examples. In the 1960s, the Labour government set about abolishing grammar schools. This was brilliant news for the independent sector. Grammar schools had been considerable engines of social mobility in a short period of time. The number of private schools securing Oxbridge places had dropped. And with the difference made almost entirely by grammar school pupils, it went from 55% private in 59 to 38% in 1967. In 1976, another Labour government came along and abolished the direct grant system, which meant that many of what we now call independent schools had actually been semi-nationalised. The state was paying for 70% of pupils in Magdalen College School and Reigate Grammar School, where the Prime Minister was educated and received a bursary, because his school was then forced into becoming independent by government cuts. Then in 1980, the Conservatives introduced the Assisted Places Scheme, and then again in 1997, the Labour Party abolished it. Now, the irony here, ladies and gentlemen, is that if the direct grant or the Assisted Places Scheme still existed, the current Education Secretary and our opponents would have much of what they want. There would be a state-mandated structure which ensures that anyone could apply to an independent school. And that's why the Sutton Trust continues to argue what Brett argued for, that the key to raising standards and securing parental choice is not abolition of some of the highest performing schools, it's widening access to them in radical and creative ways. And that's the kind of fairness, I'll come on to fairness, Callum, that I'm campaigning for. And as Julie said, without a return to the direct grant system, it's very difficult for all but the wealthiest schools to become needs blind. Now, I'm glad that Brett talked about freedom. I'll come back to you in a minute. I'm glad that Brett talked about freedom, and I'm glad, Lewis, that you talked about choice. I'm going to bring out the big guns of freedom now. John Stuart Mill. You can allow the state to make big decisions And sometimes that decision will be right for the individual, and sometimes it won't. The state is just too far away to do that. One size does not fit all. Why don't I take one from one of the civilians rather than the pro? Where did that point come from? Yes, you've been trying to say something for ages.
I'm a big believer in freedom, so I'm very glad you brought up freedom.
Okay, good.
Freedom which private schools have, which academies don't, I very much believe in freedom for academies, is on religion, which I'm quite ashamed that no one's mentioned in this debate yet. Private schools, I don't know if anyone knew this, the majority of private schools in the country have religious character. And private schools are allowed to teach creationism as fact and to not mention evolution. Now, I believe in freedom, but I'm a utilitarian. And to me, freedom means the state must turn children into adults who are capable of exercising ability. And I don't think it's a good idea for society to allow schools where people all the way from 3 to 18 can be taught religious doctrines, whether that be creationism, Islamic theocracy, whatever. I'm not saying it's the majority of private schools, but they do exist. The point I want to make is there are definitely cases where the state should be restricting parents' choice to ensure freedom, and it's not counterintuitive. And would you condemn the fact private schools have this religious freedom?
I'm not really in the business of condemning anyone. What I would say is that any good school in the state or the independent sector would be equipping pupils with the kind of tools to spot spurious argument, and that's something that would transcend whether they're a state or an independent school. I would also point out that there are many religious state schools, so I'm not quite sure where we were going with that one. But that's okay, because one size does not fit all. We do live in diverse communities in liberal democracy, and I accept that some of those views and communities are more diverse than others. And the opportunities in our communities need to reflect and hopefully complement that, unless they're creationists, obviously, in which case it's different. I tell you what, in common with many of you who are keen to detonate my side of the debate, particularly over there, I would rather not live in a society where there is a yawning gulf between the funding that's spent on different children, a gulf which, as we've heard across the floor, is based overwhelmingly on postcode. We are a nation of property owners, those of us who own it. So if you want to abolish private schools, I'll tell you the one way I would absolutely get behind. Make state schools so good that people don't bother to pay twice. That's the answer to your question. But make no mistake, it's going to take a lot more than VAT revenue or the nationalisation of the independent sector to do that. Could I just say something about fairness before I finish? Would that be all right? Okay. I won't make my points about abolishing inherited wealth. You can do that some other time. What I would like to say is this. The argument about fairness and the blank slate is a really big problem. You said you were going to raise some of the big questions. What you did is to raise some big spectres. What I would say is, what is the plan that the abolitionists have? Because this book says that abolition is hard to win, because if you do it, you have to come up with a definite proof that things are going to be better if you do that. And this is going to be a big problem. How will... And saying it's a start doesn't help. A start of what? What is the plan here? How will you widen access to higher education? Will you solve the special needs crisis? Will you increase national productivity? Will you make the UK more competitive? Limiting opportunity for some and potentially, therefore, for everyone doesn't automatically make things better for anyone. So the abolitionists, I'm afraid, have relied either on not abolishing the schools, which was interesting, or on ideological arguments or abstract arguments about fairness. Callum is the king of fairness. Or they talk about billions raised or billions saved or redeployed, because the highfalutin abstract world of billionness is the only place in which the abolition of private schools really works. They won't be replaced at the community level. It won't get better. The one-size-fits-all doesn't. So please, there are real-world questions which we need to address here, but I'm afraid that cancelling and abolishing is not the answer to any of the questions that we face in our liberal democracy, and it's certainly not the answer in education. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much for that fine speech. I just have a few notices to go through before we vote. So first is on upcoming events for this week. So on Saturday, we have an interview with Dame Melinda Simmons, who notably was the ambassador to Ukraine when the war broke out. So that would be a particularly interesting event for many of you. And on Monday, we have a lecture from Holocaust survivor Dr. Martin Stern. Next Thursday, which is the last day of open period, we have This House Believes Britain's Military Must Expand. And the week after that, we have This House Believes Trump is a 21st Century Fascist. So exciting times ahead. Now, one more notice, which is subcommittees, which is if you're interested in shaping debates like this, please apply for subcommittees. You can... Yeah, I will, yeah. You can apply for debate subcommittee to shape events like this, or speakers to get speakers in, SOCENTs to shape our social events operations, or equalities to help shape both equalities events and internal equality structures in the union. So, without further ado, floor speech prize, I think it has to go to Dexter over there. Many fine speeches that... So, in this house, we vote by our feet. The ayes are to the right, noes is to the left. If you want to abstain, you go through the middle. If you're on the balconies, my eyesight is so poor I can't read that. Which side is the ayes? Right, and a nose to the left. There you go. So we'll count up the votes and we'll be at the bar to announce the results. Thank you all.